having Latino adults in positions, again, power, influence, decision making, that's something that allows young people to see that that's possible for them.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Like my previous guest, Ulric Shannon, my guest this episode, Edgar Palacios, believes that students are more successful when they see themselves reflected in their teachers. And, like Ulric, Edgar is a graduate of the Surge Institute. Today, Edgar is the CEO of the Latinx Education Collaborative, an organization he founded to support Latinx students by supporting Latinx educators. Edgar and I discuss his work and his commitment to creating optimal learning environments for all students. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If this episode motivated you to examine the educational leadership in your community, there's a good chance it would motivate your friends and colleagues as well. So please like it and share it. And now, the interview.
I entered this work, I would say, like accidentally, and I think by divine design in some way, shape, or form. I had an incredible opportunity in like 2015 and 2016 to work with a local foundation that allowed me to travel the country and see different school models. And in the schools that I was in, there were an increasing amount of Latino students and very few Latino adults in the building that reflected the culture or community or identity of the students. And so I became curious about that. I didn't enter the work thinking about teacher diversity. I didn't think about um, all the kind of intersectional issues that come along with it. I was simply just curious about the fact that we had a lot of Latino students that were coming into classrooms and very few Latino adults in those same classrooms. And so I began to ask questions. I actually participate. I wasn't part of the panel, but as an audience member, walked into a school in Houston, Texas. 99.9% Latino students, and zero like educators of color in the building. And so I asked a question at the panel discussion with the principals and the the school leads, and just asked, why is it that in a place like Houston, in a place like Texas, we saw this kind of makeup and demographic of teachers. And the principal responded, we do what we can to recruit. Houston's a competitive environment, and so kind of is what it is, right? We go into the neighborhoods, we try to recruit folks, but like, um, you know, it happens. And secondly, she said, we can teach anybody to teach, but they have to be a good culture fit. And those two responses, or those two parts of a response, just stuck with me. I think I got a little agitated, a little aggravated. I felt a little bit of fire in me, and I was like, "That doesn't make sense." Houston, Texas it's not like it's devoid of Latino folks, and um, this whole idea that we could teach people to teach, but they had to be a good culture fit. The question around culture: whose culture are we aligning to? What does that actually mean? If we can teach anybody to teach, like, why aren't we teaching more black and brown people to teach? Like, what is up with that? And so that that event led to the work that we do today, and it was just out of curiosity. But I will also say that it's important to me. I grew up in a place like Miami, Florida, and having Latinos in positions of power and influence and decision making was not something that was new to me. It was part of my foundation, and so um, going into places in the country where that's not the case, I understood like the consequences of that. I understood what it's like to be in a space that you aren't surrounded by people from your community.
Hmm.
And I think that to me is important, right? I experienced a lot growing up in places like Spokane, Washington, and Cape Girardeau, Missouri, having to answer the question of where I'm from, where my parents are from, getting bullied for being different, not necessarily understanding some of the customs and cultural things that my counterpart students were had or
Right.
experienced. And so um, that's I understand deeply that representation is important, and that's what kind of got me into the work. And so I've been pursuing this idea that we can have more representation in classrooms and school buildings and districts, and that's what led me into it.
So there's a couple things that I want to unpack from that. But the first is obviously, you had that experience in that school in Houston. Um, Lately, though, your own organization has been documenting the disparities or the different ratios that exist in the communities that you work with. So to move it from the anecdote of being in one school that like seemingly had a very large Latinx population and no adults from that community, when you started counting in the communities that you worked with, what did you learn?
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I literally counted. So
Yeah.
I didn't know a lick about where the data was around teacher diversity, and so I picked school districts that were around the greater Kansas City metro area. I picked the ones that made the most sense, and I think I used Mark. Which is a Mid American Regional Council, like available. Like here are the counties that make up the greater Kansas City metro area, and so I literally went to every school district's website and I walked through the schools through their websites and I just counted like by either a Latino surname or by appearance
Hmm.
of who I thought might be Latino. That's how I started counting. And so I did a total amount of teachers divided by, the total amount of folks that I thought were Latino. And I came up to a number anywhere between 2 and 4%, depending on how I did the math. Um, I later realized that you could just partner with like a university, and so we partnered with the University of Missouri in Kansas City and their research center essentially, and we learned that we weren't too far off.
Mm.
In Kansas City, in the greater Kansas City metro area, only 1% of teachers are Latino. That's roughly 260 Latino educators for a community that has 50,000 Latino students plus. And so I'm glad that the data wasn't too far off in terms of
Right.
like consistency, but also the data wasn't great, right? And so understanding that there was a lot of work to be done here in terms of what it means to increase the number of Latino educators in our classrooms. Why is that? What are the barriers? What's the retention rate like? What are the issues that Latino educators are facing that prevent them from being successful in the field? Those are all questions that slowly emerge from just understanding the data and the observations around it. So yeah,
Well, and your own personal experience of kind of feeling othered. What do you know about how students are being harmed by the lack of Latinx teachers?
yeah, there's so much there that it's not even surface level, right? I think
Mm.
first and foremost, you can be what you see, right? And so I think having Latino adults in positions, again, power, influence, decision making, that's something that allows young people to see that that's possible for them.
Mhm.
And so it creates an opportunity for future casting and envisioning like what's there. Also, I think that there's a lot of nuances, right? I think children are children, and we all have, and not we, but children have very similar experiences across the board. But there are cultural nuances that make a difference, and
Yeah.
having people from the community who understand those nuances, who are able to help those young people navigate those nuances, I think it makes the process of obtaining an education that much more easy, right? I think about particularly with students that we have worked with and support. We have language access issues. We have cultural brokering
Mhm.
that's occurring. You have customs that are different, and so making sure that folks understand like the nuances of how to engage and how to engage successfully with young people, that's important. And also that it matters, right? I think there's a lot of research and data that demonstrate that when young people see themselves reflected in the teachers that serve them, they're going to have better educational outcomes and experiences long term. I think there's a lot more data available around Black
Mhm.
teachers. There's less data available around Latino teachers, and that's also partly due to because Latinos, it's a complicated identity. And
Right.
so now we have to ask questions around what does it mean to be Latino, who identifies, who doesn't identify, who counts, who doesn't count, which is all part of that nuance that I think young people are experiencing as they're growing up. And so um, those are some of the potential harms. I also we hear a lot about language, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of the young people within our community are bilingual. And so some young folks aren't able to speak Spanish in the hallways, in the classrooms. They are um, held accountable to that, or
Mm.
just punished for that in some way, shape, or form. There's sometimes less parent engagement, and we know that education is a community endeavor. It's not just solely teacher responsibility. And
Right.
so when you're not able to engage families in the education of your child, that creates additional issues and tensions. Um, and then there's just a lot of narrative that we're hearing at the national and state level, right? And even at the local level around what does it mean to be Latino, particularly if you're an immigrant, or
Right.
particularly, if you have the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so um, it becomes challenging because you have to overcome those kind of societal stereotypes. You have to kind of demonstrate that you're a human too, and that children are human and they have certain needs that we must accommodate. Um, and that doesn't always happen in classrooms. And so part of what I thought was a simple solution, let's just get more Latino teachers in classrooms that
Yeah.
understand these issues. Turns out it's not a simple solution. Turns out it's a complicated issue that um, has both local and national impact, and is really complicated. And so my naivete back in like 2016, um, I know a little bit more about the issue of the work.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and let's
yeah,
talk about that a little bit. I mean, you kind of mentioned some of the well, you talked about some of the harm that's caused, right?
yeah,
And you talked about how when, if you don't have the representation in the faculty, it makes it harder to engage the students, but also harder to engage the parents.
yeah.
There is specific feelings about services that might be cultural, that might not match with a particular school or a particular district. But when you start to talk to eligible young adults about why they weren't choosing education as a career, what were you hearing from these young adults that you are trying to recruit into this profession?
First thing first, money.
Mm,
There's a narrative around teacher pay and how little teachers get paid across
yeah,
the board. I think it's an accurate narrative. Sometimes it's not as bad as young people make it seem, though.
yeah,
And so there's a lot of correction around salaries and the opportunities for advancement within the profession itself. Two, it's actual like structural issues, right? So having to go to college, having to get a 4-year degree, having to pass a certification exam, some of those are real issues, right? Not everybody can afford college. Not everybody's going to be able to afford or find an alternative pathway in education. And if you happen to be, let's say, a child of an immigrant, there's also familiar expectations there, right? Like
yeah,
we came to this country to do this and for you to advance. And so why aren't you going to go become a doctor or an attorney or an engineer? Like why a
right.
teacher? That doesn't make sense. So there's some cultural narratives there that we have to overcome. And then I will say though, the funniest of those responses and the things that I hear often are kids saying like kids are not great. Like
Mm,
why would you want to like be in front of kids who are disrespectful and all these other kind of narratives that young people have about themselves, right? And
right.
so it is a really interesting combination of one, teachers don't get paid enough for the work that they do. Two, there are actual barriers in young people's ways in becoming a teacher. And then three, like it's hard to be around kids, right? And so I laugh at the third because you know they're participating in that in some way, shape, or form. They're
Yeah,
creating the cultures. They are part of those patterns. And I'm curious about how do we shift that narrative for young people to be like, no, it's actually awesome to be able to influence a young person's life and their decisions and how they're going to, achieve success in the future. And so, a lot of it is just really reframing of what's possible and countering um, some of the long and deeply held narratives that we have around the profession of education.
I wonder, and you might not have an answer to this,
Yeah.
and that's okay, but I wonder, and this is a topic that has come up a lot in talking about kids. When these young adults are telling you, "Well, kids aren't great. Kids in classrooms aren't great." How much of that do you think is them reflecting on their own experience and that school for them wasn't great? And just to give you some context, how this topic has typically come up in talking about kids is how hard it is to engage parents when school is not a safe place for them. When they go to a classroom to advocate for their children, they're walking into this place that was felt dangerous to them, wasn't good for them, where they felt sometimes belittled and small, and those feelings come rushing back. So, how many of these young adults do you think didn't have a good education experience themselves, so they had a hard time envisioning what that might be for another kid?
Yeah, I think that that actually is one of those underlying kind of currents within the conversations that we're having, right? Because
Yeah.
we can also further say that there are a lot of black and brown kids within our communities that don't have a positive experience around school, right? And something
Mm.
that I talk to my peers and to my colleagues around is this idea that sometimes you're coming back to secondhand trauma, right? Like
Mhm.
if you, to your point, if you didn't have a great experience in school, like you're not going to want to go back and you're going to want to avoid the situation altogether. So I do think that it's reflective of some of the environments that are being created, right? Um, and 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 it's also a reflection, I think, of the educators that have been in front of young people, right? I see a lot of opportunities where there are grow your own programs. There are
Mhm.
kind of apprenticeships and teacher assistant kind of opportunities for young people in all these different ways. Um, but if you have an educator who's not excited about the profession
Yeah.
or who is, consistently just talking about all the negative within the profession, that has a huge
Yeah.
impact on what young people are seeing and hearing. And naturally, they don't want to go into the profession. And so I think some of these programs are also as good as the educator that's in front of them. And if you can find an educator who is both good at their job and excited about the
Yeah.
profession and what's possible, I think we're going to have a lot more success in the long term with recruiting young people into the profession. I think that if you are rightfully tired or rightfully angry about your experiences and you're sharing that with young people, what we're doing is just harming the profession long term, and young people are just going to stay away from it. So I think it can be as simple as that.
Well, and it raises the question, if you never had that experience of a teacher seeing something in you or opening up a world to you that you'd never experienced before, if you never had that experience, and it's an experience that we know so many people have had, that we know that so many people, the adult that made the difference, that extra adult that made a difference in their life was a teacher. But if it didn't happen to you, how do you get somebody to appreciate what that feeling might be like, right? That seems to be a tremendous barrier.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I will also name that that is some of the driver that is a driving element of some of the young people who are going into the profession. Right, a
Right.
common narrative that I hear with young educators and aspiring educators is that they're going to into the profession because they want to be the person that they didn't
Yeah.
have.
Oh,
Right,
wow.
and that's actually, to me, that connects to a much like
Yeah.
deeper version of education, right? That is a strong why. And what I've noticed in folks who have that kind of mentality, like I'm here to create an experience that I didn't have myself, they seem to be much more committed to the work long term. They're able to ride out the waves of like the first year and the second year teaching and getting comfortable in their space and their environment and their profession. But it is a driving quality of a lot of the young people who are going into the profession. They really want to make a difference in those experiences
Right.
because they understand firsthand the impact of what it is that they didn't have themselves.
So you're doing you're doing this work, Edgar. I don't mean to laugh out loud,
Yeah,
but I was formulating the question in my head, and I'm going to start listing the barriers to your work currently.
yeah,
So you're doing this work in an environment that is decreasingly recognizing the contributions of Latinx citizens in
Yeah.
this country in an environment that is decreasingly recognizing the importance of any education and especially of public education,
Yeah.
and in an environment that's cutting funds to all of these programs that help students and classrooms succeed. So so how you
Yes.
doing, Edgar? How's it going? Like what's working? Where are you finding hope? And where have you what's been your success?
Thank you for so aptly describing the environmental conditions in which we find ourselves in. I think this is where faith comes into play, right? I think this
Mm,
is the part of our work that has to be rooted in the bigger ideals. And so, just because the world is somewhat caving in around us doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility here to like offer a different alternative,
yeah,
right? We, whether the government or our communities see value in our people, um, doesn't mean that there isn't any value that's not being created, right?
right,
And I think for us in this moment, it's important to like raise a flag to say, hey, we're not going to go down without a fight. We have to be active promoters of education and public education. We have to be active promoters of our community. We have to offer different alternatives or different alternatives to the narratives that we're hearing, right? And we have to like do it and do it from a platform and in a way that asserts ourselves. And I think that that's one of the places where I'm finding hope. Our funding is less complicated than other organizations' funding, right? We don't have access to federal dollars or state dollars in this moment, which means we survive off generous contributions of individual donors as well as philanthropic entities who believe in the work that we do. Um, I don't know if that's going to go away or not.
right,
It's still out in the open. But while we have those resources, then we have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to put up a good fight in those ways. You asked about our successes, and I think that that's really um, that I can be a good executive director and say, hey, listen, in 20 two years ago, we launched a campaign for called Futuros, where we're committed to bringing 50 new additional Latino educators into the Kansas City area. We are on track and on our goal to do that by 2027. So, like, that's a win.
nice,
We have built incredible and exceptional relationships with Latino families and caregivers, where they feel like they're welcome into our space, but they're also actively organizing and doing work on their own, which we're supporting. That's ultimately improving the educational outcomes and experiences of their young people. That's a win. We launched a digital literacy program where we have it's fully in Spanish. It's designed for parents to be able to use computers to understand the
mm,
technology and for them to get a device at the end of the program. That way, they're better able to communicate with their teachers and schools and whatnot. That's a win. We've graduated over 300 people in that program. Those are like small wins.
mhm,
I think long term, like what is the actual impact that we're trying to create? And so I think for us, it is really about like how do we shift the narrative, right? How do we actually shift the beliefs and um, the opportunities that our community has access to? Teacher representation is one thing out of a lot of other levers that actually will improve the experiences of our young people in spaces and environments. And so um, I don't know if we're going to get to parity anytime soon.
mm,
I think these are generational issues, clearly, and we are just another organization in the front lines and doing this work. So I have lessened my expectations that we're going to figure this out and figure it out quickly. I forget sometimes that we have decades, if not centuries,
yeah,
of this kind of history and legacy that we're fighting against and fighting through. Um, I do think a lot about this idea of maximizing impact and
mm,
minimizing harm, right? And I think throughout the last, since 2018, since the idea in 2016, there have been a lot of learning lessons, right? Um, I'll give you a great example of this. We
mhm,
love to celebrate Latino educators. We think it's an important thing to do, recognize their accomplishments. And so we set out to do awards for Latino educators. What I didn't recognize was once you deem somebody an educator of the year, there's also a whole lot of energy that comes towards them, right? There's a lot of things that they may not be prepared for. And so when I think about maximizing impact, we want to celebrate and recognize folks for their contributions. When we think about minimizing harm, like how do we make sure we do that in a way that doesn't limit their ability to continue to be successful or to preserve some sort of good mental health along the way? Same things with young people. If we're
Yeah.
advocating in a school, we have a C4 as well, Revolución Educativa, so we get a little political and a little bit more advocacy minded in that space. Um, when you're advocating on behalf of something, you're also advocating against something else.
Yeah.
And understanding the nuances and the complexities of that is a part of that work. And so, um,
Okay, so
yeah,
I'm going to push back on that one point there because
cool.
I think that I'm really struggling with some of the false dichotomies that are being presented. And I say they're false dichotomies because people are talking, for example, you've heard on a national level that people talk about DEI as being on a different side of a continuum from merit. That's a false dichotomy. They
Yes.
don't exist that way, right? Like, so in fact, I've made the argument publicly that if you believed in merit, then you want as many people competing as possible. How can you say you're the best if only half of the people were allowed to compete, right? So I think that the best way to get merit is to make sure that all the barriers to allowing people to participate are removed. That's what I think merit means.
Yes.
And so this false dichotomy. So when you are, the mindset that we've gotten into, and here I'm on a little bit of a soapbox, and I apologize, Edgar, but the notion that when we're asking for something, we're taking away from something else. That's this zero sum mindset that isn't helpful because it's not based in any sort of actual facts. We know that we can all achieve, and this is going back to like James Baldwin, who's like a saint to the show. We don't know what's possible when we get full contributions from everybody, and that really, at some point, is the cost of bias. I'm going to ask you to rethink whether or not you're actually asking for something to be taken away from somebody if you're asking for more. You might not be. You might not be. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think we also have to recognize that perception is reality, right?
Yeah.
And so in this world, when we say DEI is a good thing and other people say it's a bad thing, like we have to be prepared for both
Yeah.
entities, right? And I agree with the idea of false dichotomies and that not everything is as binary as it comes out to
Yeah.
be. But the reality is, people who are against our ideas. Also, let me actually like double down on this part of it. Like
Hmm.
we have an assumption that when people say that they want to compete or that they want things to be merit based, that that's actually what they mean, right? One of the things that I actually get frustrated by
Yes.
is the fact that those that are proponents of diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever belonging, justice, however the acronym, like, is somehow that we're on the wrong side of history,
Yeah.
right? Or somehow like we are the ones that we are in this moment accommodating, right, a group of people that say DI is bad, and we're making all these adjustments to our language, we're making adjustments to grants,
Yeah.
contracts, we're making adjustments to our website, like all of it.
Right.
When did we lose a narrative? And
Yeah.
at what point are we just not allowed to say that like racism is not good either? It's not the option that we should be looking forward to, right? And so on that, like we have these dog whistles,
Yeah.
right? It's a whistle, kind of like when the principal was like, they have to be a good culture fit,
Yeah.
right? Same thing here, like, oh, merit, like the fact is like we don't actually talk about and what we mean, right? And that to me is one of the things that grinds my gears. it
Yeah.
is it is a thing that like we're not here just fighting for diversity, equity, inclusion. Like we're fighting against racism, we're fighting
Mhm.
against implicit racist systems that have created the conditions where our young people are failing, right? Like, so to me, I get really frustrated with the fact that somehow we have collectively decided that instead of just us pushing back and saying like, no, this is not the world that we're going to live in, we have decided, you know what? it's okay for us to modify our language. It's okay
Yeah.
for us to like polish our words because at the end of the day, like we can do the work without having the words, right? Not a big deal. I'm not at that in that position. I am um this is where the privilege comes in, and this is like
I think
how the
so.
work has evolved, right? Like we have an opportunity in this moment to say, nah, we're good. This is how we're going to move forward. Now, will there be consequences to that? Absolutely. And as I think about our work long term, though, I'm okay with the negative consequences if it means like we get to advance some of the more positive things here in this moment.
Well, and I think that's because you and I understand the world of kids.
Yeah,
Right. So when, I think that intellectually, I understand that I can not use these words anymore. And maybe my day to day work will be the same,
yeah,
except for, ultimately your work, ultimately my work is trying to create like healthier, happier kids. And when they all of a sudden say, wait a second, we're not allowed to use the words that best describe me. We're not allowed to talk about my history. We're not allowed to talk about my identity, my express. What is it doing to them? And so you're right. I don't think we can just say, "Oh, if we don't like these words, we just won't use them anymore." If those words help our students feel safe in their environments, then we can't let go of those words and we can't let go of those concepts.
and this is where I think this is where we as adults get in trouble, right? It
Yeah,
is we are instead of understanding that childhood is about developing a strong identity, right,
yeah,
and about being in safe environments and about exploring and doing these things. Like we are legislating, we're legislating identities and what they can and can't be, and that causes a whole bunch of issues down the road, right? Um, it, so this is why I think our work is, and I hate this saying, so I'm gonna say it, but I do hate it, and I want to name that. Like this is why our work is actually more important now than ever, right?
yeah,
Because it is in these moments where the tables are turned against us,
yeah,
where like we actually have to double down and say, hey, no, we actually believe in this, and we believe that
yeah,
this is the way forward for our young people, knowing that there are going to be very real consequences to that because we're not in power all the time, right? We don't,
right,
there are things that are above us and beyond us in the ways that we can control, and so right now this is a moment that requires courage and risk taking, um, and like the ability to just stand on your beliefs,
yeah.
knowing that like the other side's going to do the same thing, right?
Well, and I think that too, like, and I've been saying this for a while as well, though, like anymore, I feel that one of the things we need to do is get out of the kids' way because they see these issues in a very different way because they've been raised in this century. They've been raised with these tools. They've been raised with friend circles and environments that are more diverse and more open than ever before. That's
Yeah,
been demonstrated quantitatively. And so some of these issues that we're fighting about and these funding levels and the words that we can use, they're so far beyond that.
yeah.
And we just have to like stop things from imploding before they can take them over. Really, sometimes I'm just like, I just want to be somebody that clears the path because I think that if we wait 10 or 15 years, it'll be okay if this generation is allowed to actually get into those roles.
Something you've helped me just kind of reflect on real quickly here is we actually face these issues as young professionals
Mm,
entering the work environment, right? We face people along the way that are afraid of losing power and
yeah,
losing their influence and losing their
yeah,
ability to do these things. And so I think if we were to let young people do what they need to do and what they want to do, and I'm speaking academically, of course,
mhm,
within reason, because we want to make sure that young people are also safe. Um, yeah, like it is it is in young people that like they're our future, and
yeah,
like they're our future caretakers and decision makers
yeah,
and folks, and so why not invest in them today? Like
yeah,
why not give them all the opportunities available to them? So by the time that we're relying on their leadership, And actually, let me scratch that because we should always be relying on the leadership of young people. Like this is we're here to serve them. So
We are, and we should take some credit for it too. They didn't just happen into this world. They're actually using tools that we made.
yeah,
They are engaging with ideas that we made possible, that we opened up. Now, I didn't create the playlist on my kids' Spotify account, but we created the tools and created the opportunities for those artists that are populating it. And I defy you to find a single young person that doesn't have the single most diverse playlist on the planet, far
right.
more diverse than I ever was exposed to. It's fantastic. I want to get back though to you for just a second, Edgar, because you're a passionate leader. You had the courage to start your own organization. How did leadership organizations prepare you for what you're doing now, or kind of help you? Because we had Ulrich, we had him talking about the Surge Institute, and you got to go through that. And what do these kind of professional opportunities for education do, and how do they contribute to the solution?
I love that question. I'm a self-described and self-appointed leadership development junkie, right? Like
Okay.
I love this idea of the practice of leadership. I don't always like the results, um, but before I get to Surge, talk about my sixth grade experience as part of the Linwood Cabinet in Linwood Elementary in
Yeah.
Spokane, Washington. I was invited to participate in this, leadership group for sixth graders, and we met on a weekly basis. Uh, we put candy together. We did candy sales. We did,
Yeah.
plays and for to encourage people to like all these other things, right? And like we learned how to collaborate. We learned how to work in groups. We took responsibility for our events and whatnot, and it was a safe and great experience to like practice leadership, right? And having ideas and executing them in sixth grade. And so ever since then, I've been a part of leadership development programs along the way, including Surge. And Surge for me was a transformational program. One, it requires you to be honest with yourself, right?
Mm,
A lot of leadership development programs are about like the how, right? Here's how you're a good leader. Here's what you can do to improve upon your leadership. I think Surge is about the why and the who, right?
mm,
Like who are you and what does your leadership look like and how is that authentically you, right? Like not how you perform it, but how do you enter its
mm.
essence, if that makes sense. And so the time that I did with Surge, I say it's a 6 month program at that. We did Surge Academy in Kansas City. I'm on my sixth year of Surge. In fact, this past 2 weeks ago, I was at the national convening, and I won an OG Surge award. This is how involved I've been in
Nice.
the organization. And it's been, an incredible experience because the lessons that you learn there, the ones about authenticity, the ones about like what are you willing to risk in order to like fulfill your vision, like what are you willing to contribute? How are you going to
Yeah.
contribute? How do you show up in excellence? Like these are questions that are foundational to any leader, but they also give you a place to practice and a place to practice with other folks that are like working alongside these issues. It's a leadership development organization for Black and Brown leaders in education
Yeah.
primarily. And so there's also a lot of similarity in the issues that we find ourselves in, right? We have a lot of debates and discussions around like, how do we move forward in a time like this? Um, and I think that that's an important part. Like we have to invest in
Right.
people and they saw fit to invest in me. I will also note the other side of that coin is that oftentimes we will place Black and brown folks into leadership development programs instead of actually letting them lead.
Right. Right.
And I think one of the things that I'm committed to more recently, but is doing less leadership development and doing more practice of leadership, right? Learning my own things, making my own mistakes, and then also being able to have a network of people that I can call and be like, "Uh-oh, I messed up," or "Uh-oh, like this work didn't work out as well as I thought it would be." That I think that that's the power. But I have found that um, leadership development can be a nice little distraction sometimes from actually like saying, hey, we're going to give you this project or this organization or this thing, and we need you to move it forward from this point onward, right? So yeah, I have a couple of different opinions there.
Yeah, but I think that in my experience, and this is something that I also see with youth programs too, is you know helping young people and then helping professionals, helping ourselves overcome that what has sometimes been called feeling like a fraud.
Yeah.
So again, it's sometimes it's not the case that opportunities need to be afforded us or afforded kids. We just need to change our own willingness to not to feel like we actually belong in that position. So, I mean, is that something that leadership helped do? That the program that you went to make you realize that you did belong in that office, that you did belong, lobbying that legislator, that you did belong walking down those scary halls in a Capitol building or making a speech on steps somewhere. I mean, I did it help you get over the feeling like a fraud, or maybe you're one of the unicorns that has never felt that, Edgar. So
I mean, I oof, at the risk of being too vulnerable, like I don't know if that's a feeling that ever goes away.
no, I don't think it does, man. Like, I'm
You know,
sorry.
I think this idea, one, I've worked really hard at, well, yeah, I've worked really hard at building an organization that's
Right.
centered belonging, right? And there are days that I don't feel like I belong to even my own organization.
Yeah.
So I want to be clear about that. Two, I think what programs like Surge does, it's not necessarily about like saying, "Hey, you belong in these spaces." It's more about saying, like, if you're called to be in that space, be in that space, right?
Got it.
It's
Yeah.
about giving you maybe the permission to say, "Take up space, even if you don't think you should,"
Okay.
right?
Right.
So it is more about practicing courage and understanding that courage and is a path forward, as well as tension is a path forward, as well as being uncomfortable is a path forward, versus
Mhm.
understanding that leadership is this lovey-dovey kind of act that some people make it out to be, right? Um, and I think my hope is along the way is that you have more honest and authentic conversations with other leaders and younger leaders to say, like, actually, like, the thing that was in sixth grade, it was great to give people candy and to make everybody happy. Like that
Right.
was my foundational like experience with leadership, right? Like leadership is about like making sure it's customer service. It is about making sure people are getting candy when they need it. It's about making sure that we're like doing discounts on candy for those who need like all that
Yeah.
fun stuff. I think sometimes we tend to lie to young people about what leadership is, and we tend to avoid like the hard parts of it, right?
Yeah.
Like saying the thing that maybe like nobody else wants you to say.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's about doing the thing that people aren't sure you should do. Like
Right.
it's about being out of step with your community sometimes, learning when to be quiet, like all these other
Putting
things,
a target on your back.
right?
Right.
And being comfortable with the fact that like that target like might be utilized at some
Yeah.
point too,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Um, that is not fun nor sexy. Like and so I think this idea around belonging in those spaces, I think if you wait for that feeling, then you're never gonna be in those
Right.
spaces. And then two, it's about I think ultimately having the clarity to understand that like if you can just pause for a minute and look around, like maybe you understand that like the other people in that space are also kind of struggling with the same things that you're struggling with, right? And so there's a level of humanity and compassion that you might have for others that I think completely shift the paradigm and the opportunity to say maybe like we're all doing the best that we can, and how do we work through that together versus like uh, so yeah, the imposter syndrome, the fraud thing, every day I wake up with that. What I've learned is reframing, right?
Yeah.
What I've gone through my therapist and through my coaches and my leadership coaches is whatnot is to like, here's a story you're telling yourself. How do we shift this story in a way that helps you move whatever you want forward, right? Like, I wish we would start younger with that.
Yeah.
Maybe young people have access to that earlier than I did, but I will tell you, as I turn 40, um, I still feel like a little kid in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and I'm also like, I got big responsibilities.
Yeah.
How do I like balance that youthful energy
Yeah.
and like the severity of some of the responsibilities that I carry in spaces where I may not actually belong. Like that might if you've ever been to the Missouri State Capitol, I will tell you,
I've been in state. I've been in state capitals. I know. They're yeah
and
yeah
sometimes I think the other act of leadership is knowing that you don't want to belong
yeah.
and being comfortable with that too. So,
Well, Edgar, I want to thank you so much for everything that you're doing for all kids. We are talking about, in particular, Latinx students today, but everything that you're doing benefits all of our kids, and I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for being a guest on Talking About Kids. This was a real delight.
well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk more about the work that we do, and I also really appreciate your commitment to our young people. I think um, we, as adults, we have to have more courage than our young people display, and our young people display a lot of courage. And so, I'm hopeful that we can create a world where we are matching, um, if not just meeting them at their level of courage. So, thank you for the opportunity.
That was Edgar Palacios. More information about Edgar and the Latinx Education Collaborative is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, leave me a note. Let me know what you think. I pay attention to every bit of feedback. Our theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.